In March 2024, a maintenance crew working along the southern perimeter of Lake Wünsdorf, Germany, unearthed a reinforced steel hatch buried beneath layers of post-war concrete. Local authorities assumed it was a remnant of the Wehrmacht's former command facilities. But within hours of its discovery, a Bundeswehr forensic team arrived and sealed the site under military jurisdiction. 2 days later, a classified memorandum, tagged BND Arch 0457, circulated internally, referencing potential biocontainment infrastructure predating 1945. Rumors spread among contractors that radiation meters had spiked inside the initial entry shaft. When journalists requested information, government spokespeople called it an unexploded ordnance precaution. But satellite images showed increased nighttime activity and thermal readings from beneath the forest floor. What the team uncovered in that bunker would soon force German and NATO historians to confront a chapter of wartime experimentation erased from all known records for nearly 80 years. Chapter 1. The bunker beneath Lake Wünsdorf. The first descent into the Lake Wünsdorf structure began at 05:42 hours on April 2, 2024. The Bundeswehr's Explosive Ordnance Disposal Unit had already cleared the outer perimeter when Dr. Lucas Meinhardt, an archaeologist contracted by the Federal Archives, stepped through the hatch. Behind him, a team of environmental technicians from the Robert Koch Institute carried sealed specimen containers and portable Geiger counters. The passage led downward for nearly 30 meters before opening into a chamber lined with steel plates, still gleaming under decades of corrosion. On one wall, faded stenciling read, Hauptquartier Central, Betreten verboten, 1945. At first, it looked like a standard command post. Then the lights from the team's headlamps swept across the far corner, where a row of lead-lined cabinets bore a series of embossed symbols no one recognized. Each cabinet was sealed with a numbered latch, or 1 through 06, and beneath the numbers, the same marking, Project Eisenfaust. Inside the first cabinet were glass ampoules filled with a dark, resin-like substance, perfectly preserved under vacuum. Meinhardt's logbook notes that the air smelled faintly metallic, and that the temperature inside the bunker was unnaturally stable, exactly 11 degrees. When one of the Bundeswehr technicians scanned the ampoules, the meter gave off a short, stuttering alarm, usually associated with alpha radiation. Samples were immediately transferred to the RKI's containment vehicle for testing. Within 24 hours, the site was placed under Federal Security Classification Stufe 4, and civilian access was revoked. In the weeks that followed, the Ministry of Defense quietly released a sanitized statement, claiming the bunker contained industrial waste of unknown wartime origin. But on April 17th, a leak surfaced through a journalist at Der Spiegel, citing an internal BND memo labeled IFE 12 1944 Maris Eisenfaust Field Applications. The document described a wartime experiment conducted under the supervision of the Reich's Weapons Research Institute, Heereswaffenamt, between 1943 and 1945. Its purpose, to study biological integrity in sealed, oxygen-deprived atmospheres. The memo further indicated collaboration with scientists from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Medical Research, a name long associated with ethical violations during the Nazi regime. The codename Eisenfaust, Iron Fist, appeared repeatedly, alongside phrases such as contaminant threshold and adaptive immunity trials. Parallel investigations into Soviet occupation records revealed that the Red Army had catalogued the Wünsdorf complex in 1946 but left certain sectors sealed, labeling them unrecoverable. Archival references pointed to a brief correspondence between General Ivan Serov of the NKVD and British liaison officers in Berlin, dated August 14, 1947. The letter, preserved in the Russian State Archive but never translated until now, mentioned a chamber containing pressurized biological matter, possibly linked to prior German experimentation. The British response recommended non-interference pending Allied jurisdiction reassessment. The subject was never reopened. By May 2024, Meinhardt's team had recovered 12 crates from adjacent rooms, including one filled with waterlogged documents. Handwritten lab reports and temperature logs dated from December 1944 to March 1945. Many pages bore the signature Dr. W. Falkenrath, a name absent from official wartime scientist registries. However, a marginal note in one file referenced Station Delta, transfer to Wünsdorf, a known Wehrmacht testing site for experimental weaponry. The implication was immediate. The experiments beneath Lake Wünsdorf may have been linked to the late-stage attempts at biological weapon development, something Nazi Germany was believed never to have operationalized. The handwriting analysis matched samples from the Wünsdorf archives, confirming that Falkenrath was not fictional. On June 2nd, a classified report titled WWII 2024-B circulated among NATO's Joint Research Task Force. It contained preliminary RKI findings. The resin-like material in the ampules was determined to be a composite polymer embedded with dormant bacterial spores. Genomic sequencing suggested artificial gene splicing decades ahead of its time, indicating deliberate manipulation of bacterial resistance. What startled scientists was the method. The polymer encasing the spores had been designed to regulate exposure to oxygen, a primitive biocontainment strategy unknown in 1944. The data implied a level of biotechnological understanding that should have been impossible before the 1960s. The discovery triggered diplomatic friction. Russian state media accused Germany of withholding Soviet-era classified assets, while British historians called for full transparency. Yet in late June, the BND quietly sealed off the entire Wünsdorf forest under heritage preservation, effectively terminating all field access. Only fragments of Meinhardt's notes escaped through a secure academic network. Among them was one sentence underlined twice. Chamber 6 was already open when we arrived. No official explanation has ever been released about who breached it or when. By August 2024, journalists attempting to follow the Eisenfaust trail traced shipping records from 1945 showing an unregistered convoy departing Wünsdorf toward the Baltic coast under the supervision of the SS Technical Division. The convoy vanished, but a corresponding entry in an Allied air reconnaissance log, dated April 18, 1945, described an explosion near the village of Baruth, followed by a toxic cloud lasting several hours. Civilian casualties were never recorded. The coordinates matched precisely with the convoy's projected route. Historians now suspect the incident may have been an emergency disposal of the Eisenfaust material. Today, the Lake Wünsdorf bunker remains sealed under reinforced containment, patrolled by military police. No further excavations are permitted. The official narrative maintains that the discovery poses no threat to public health. Yet, the BND's internal archive lists ongoing analysis under project codename Nebelglas or Fog Glass. According to leaked metadata from one of those reports, residual samples from Chamber 6 displayed biological activity as recently as September 2024. The readings have not been explained. Those who entered the site have signed lifetime non-disclosure agreements. For all official purposes, Project Eisenfaust does not exist. And yet, somewhere beneath the calm waters of Lake Wünsdorf, the past continues to breathe. Chapter 2. Operation Silver Cross reopened. In October 2021, the British National Archives quietly declassified a collection of Cold War-era files under reference HS429197. The documents, buried under multiple cross-index tags, contained a single unassuming entry titled OPSC, Joint Atmospheric Phenomena Analysis, 1962-1967. That abbreviation, OPSC, was the first breadcrumb leading investigators to Operation Silver Cross, a program so secret that neither the CIA nor MI6 admitted to its existence. When Dr. Eleanor Kersey, a historian specializing in Cold War technology, accessed the file through the Freedom of Information portal, she expected meteorological data. Instead, she found an unsigned memorandum stamped Top Secret, Cosmic, a NATO clearance level reserved for nuclear intelligence. The memo referenced Phase 2 signal analysis, Shetland Station, and anomalous radar incidents beyond the Norwegian Sea. A hand-scrawled note in the margin read only, Joint signatures confirmed. Maintain cooperation until further notice. The trail led Kersey north to the decaying radar ruins at Saxe-Vord, once Britain's northernmost listening post. Most of the site had been decommissioned in 2005, its radar domes torn down and sold for scrap. Yet beneath the grass-covered mounds, she discovered an entry to a sealed stairwell not listed on any base schematics. Inside, the corridor smelled of salt and machine oil. The concrete walls bore faded stencil marks in both English and Cyrillic. At the lowest level lay a small control room, its consoles shattered by time, but the labels still legible. Silver Cross, main array. Kersey photographed every surface before notifying the Ministry of Defense. Within 48 hours, military personnel arrived and removed all equipment under Section 4 of the Official Secrets Act. She was told not to return. Weeks later, a retired signals officer named Graham Stenton contacted her anonymously, claiming to have served on Silver Cross detail in 1963. In a recorded interview later leaked to BBC Panorama, Stenton described the operation as a joint air defense experiment that went far beyond radar. He recalled Soviet technicians being flown in under diplomatic cover, working alongside British personnel at a time when both sides publicly accused each other of espionage. "We were told it was about atmospheric interference," Stenton said, his voice trembling. "But we were tracking something else, something that wasn't aircraft." His unit logged pulse patterns that defied known frequencies, bursts that mimicked encrypted radio traffic but lacked human modulation. "They called it ghost signal," he added. "Then one day everything just stopped. We were told to erase the tapes. The erased tapes became Kersey's obsession. Through declassified NATO minutes dated March 1964, she uncovered that Operation Silver Cross fell under the direction of the Combined Signals Research Group, CSRG, headquartered at RAF Fylingdales. The minutes mention signal anomalies threatening first strike early warning accuracy, and a joint Soviet delegation permitted to inspect the radar feeds, a revelation historians previously thought impossible during that tense phase of the Cold War. Why would NATO share classified radar data with its enemy? One paragraph offered a cryptic answer. Mutual verification of false positives under OPSC mandate, necessary for strategic stability. The implication was chilling. Both sides feared that atmospheric distortions could trigger false nuclear alerts, possibly leading to accidental war. In early 2022, Kersey and an investigative journalist, Oliver Hales, obtained permission to search the defunct Saxavord station once more, this time under archaeological research status. Hidden behind rusted filing cabinets in a side chamber, they found what appeared to be an intact lead-lined safe. Inside were reels of magnetic tape labelled SXC3 Spolar 66. The reels were later digitized at the British Library Sound Archive under strict supervision. The recovered audio contained bursts of static punctuated by faint rhythmic tones, identical to known early warning radar sweeps, but underneath, spectral analysis revealed something else. Dual frequency patterns matching Soviet data transmissions from Murmansk. Both signals had been fused together in the recording, creating a composite pulse impossible to produce with 1960s equipment. Someone, or something, had deliberately synchronized the two. The Ministry of Defense refused to comment on the tapes, but a declassified CIA cable dated November 2, 1966, under the heading Arctic Incident, Silver Cross Termination, describes a synchronization event that caused simultaneous radar blackouts across both NATO and Soviet sectors. The cable notes joint acknowledgement of malfunction and agreement to destroy sensitive material. The timing coincided with an unrecorded nuclear alert in Moscow later that same day, an alert confirmed only through Soviet-era civil defense archives released in 2009. It appeared that Operation Silver Cross had been an unprecedented moment of cooperation born from mutual fear, the realization that either side's technology could accidentally initiate Armageddon. By late 2022, fragments of correspondence surfaced from within the Ministry of Defense's private archive. Among them was a hand-typed directive addressed to Air Vice Marshal J. Rowan, CSRG liaison, dated December 1967. It ordered the termination of all personnel associated with Project SXC3 and the complete excision of joint research materials from registry holdings. The final line read, "Subject matter deemed existentially destabilizing to national command structures." All personnel records of the Silver Cross Division vanished afterward. When Kersey attempted to locate Rowan's descendants, she found his name struck from every Royal Air Force roll between 1952 and 1968. The story might have ended there, if not for a second anomaly. In 2023, a Scottish telecommunications firm installing fibre optic cables along the Shetland coast detected residual electromagnetic interference at 2.7 GHz. The same band used by early Cold War radar systems. The interference originated from beneath the cliffs near the decommissioned station. Survey drones captured a metallic reflection half buried under rock and salt water. The Ministry of Defense immediately issued a no-fly notice for the area. Kersey never gained access to the site again. According to unverified reports leaked from within the Defense Infrastructure Organization, the recovered object bore both British and Russian serial markings. As of early 2025, Operation Silver Cross remains an unacknowledged episode in Cold War history. The digitized SXC-3 tapes are stored in a sealed archive in Kew, designated Restricted, Joint Review Pending. The official narrative describes them as standard meteorological data. Yet those who have heard the recordings describe the background hum that lingers between pulses, a harmonic vibration that no one has yet explained. Dr. Kersey calls it the residue of fear embedded in sound. In her private notes, recovered after her disappearance in November 2024, one phrase repeats in bold letters. It wasn't interference, it was coordination. Chapter 3, the Kyoto Directive Files. In early 2022, an archivist named Aiko Tanaka was digitizing declassified Allied occupation records stored in the basement of Kyoto University when she noticed a crate mislabeled Cultural Reconstruction Materials, 1946. The contents were not restoration plans but microfilm reels bearing the insignia of the US Office of Strategic Services, precursor to the CIA. Each reel was sealed in wax and tagged OSS JPN 87KD. Curious, Tanaka loaded one reel into a reader. What appeared on the screen were fragments of intercepted transmissions between US intelligence officers and Tokyo-based occupation administrators. Every message referenced the same directive number, KY-1221, immediate containment of biowarfare research. The last frame ended abruptly with the line, materials seized per the Kyoto Directive, local cooperation terminated. Within days, the Japanese Cabinet Office quietly dispatched a team from the Public Records and Archives Management Division. The crate was removed from campus under official custody, but not before Tanaka copied the reel's index pages. They listed confiscated assets, including bacteriological reports and biomedical experimentation summaries, linked to the Imperial Army's notorious Unit 731. What alarmed historians wasn't the connection to the known atrocities in Manchuria, but several entries labeled 731A, Domestic Application Trials, Nagano Prefecture. No such subunit was believed to have existed within Japan's home islands. When the discovery reached the National Institute for Defense Studies, the documents were sealed under public safety concerns. In May 2022, freelance researcher Kenji Sato obtained a copy of Tanaka's notes through an academic contact. Sato had spent years tracking rumors of an unregistered medical facility operating under the name Tokai Textile Cooperative near Nagano City during the final months of World War II. Local folklore spoke of an outbreak that forced the army to seal the area. Sato's fieldwork uncovered remnants of reinforced concrete foundations hidden behind cedar groves, structures inconsistent with textile manufacturing. Soil samples collected from the site contained unusually high concentrations of formaldehyde and phenol, both chemicals used in early biological containment. When he presented his findings to local officials, they dismissed the results as contamination from post-war industrial runoff. Days later, Sato's home office was broken into, his research drives missing. He filed a police report. It was quietly closed without investigation. Meanwhile, an American historian, Dr. Miriam Corcoran, independently discovered a parallel record in the US National Archives under identifier RG-226, Box 9451. The file contained a memorandum titled Post-Surrender Bacteriological Seizure Operations, Kyoto Division, signed by Colonel George P. Wyman, OSS Medical Intelligence. Wyman described joint efforts with Japanese scientists to catalog data obtained from pre-surrender experiments in controlled infection environments. The document included a reference to Project J-Halo, believed to be an early name for the Kyoto Directive enforcement team. Crucially, Wyman's memo mentioned the deliberate suppression of certain research to prevent duplication by Soviet intelligence. It concluded with the instruction, archive remainder in non-indexed microfilm, destroy all physical samples. Corcoran's publication of this finding in Modern Intelligence Review was swiftly withdrawn after editorial re-evaluation. By late 2022, Both Japanese and American agencies denied the existence of the Kyoto Directive, but Tanaka, now under private protection, provided journalists with high-resolution scans of the original microfilm headers. Frame 17 showed the OSS stamp, Med 731A, preservation required, transfer pending Geneva, dated October 1945. Frame 18 depicted a typed list of recovered materials, tissue suspension vials, patient autopsy logs, and low-temperature infection chambers. Analysts identified the language as consistent with documentation from Manchuria's Unit 731 operations, except for one phrase, oxygen deprivation adaptation, absent from any prior research. The implication was that experiments in Nagano may have focused on sustaining pathogens in oxygen-poor environments, a primitive forerunner to cryogenic biological preservation. In early 2023, satellite imaging commissioned by independent journalists detected subsurface anomalies beneath the former textile site. Rectilinear voids roughly 15 meters below ground, consistent with sealed rooms. When excavation was attempted, the Ministry of Health declared the area a protected contamination zone and halted all digging. Unverified reports from a construction subcontractor described a metal vault door, exposed briefly before officials intervened. No further photographs were released. However, leaked correspondence between the ministry and the Self-Defense Forces document code, JDA 22-121, discussed the transfer of remaining biological archives to secure military custody, confirming that physical material had indeed been recovered. Mid-2023, rumors spread of a sealed tunnel network beneath the site, linking to an abandoned rail spur used during the 1940s for military freight. Independent divers exploring a nearby reservoir found rusted rail fragments matching wartime gauge standards. In September, a Japanese public broadcaster aired a short segment about mystery bunkers in Nagano before it was abruptly pulled from circulation. The official explanation cited safety misinformation, yet an internal producer's memo obtained later indicated external pressure from allied diplomatic partners. Researchers now suspect that the Kyoto Directive represented an intentional concealment of domestic biological testing conducted by Japanese and later Allied scientists. The directive's structure, referencing medical containment and strategic retention, mirrors post-war US operations like Paperclip and Operation Matchbox, programs that absorbed Axis scientific expertise for Cold War research. The OSS may have sanitized Japan's biowarfare archives to preserve their strategic value while erasing evidence of war crimes. As of early 2025, neither the Japanese government nor the US Department of Defense has acknowledged the Kyoto Directive's authenticity. The Nagano site remains fenced and guarded, labeled as a chemical waste decontamination zone. Unconfirmed. Sources within the Defense Ministry claim that new containment units were installed underground in December 2024. Aiko Tanaka lives under a new identity, her testimony archived by an independent human rights group. In her final recorded statement before disappearance, she whispered one line that has since become synonymous with the case. The documents were never lost, they were waiting to be found again. Chapter 4. Red Vault, the Odessa Cache. In June 2020, following a partial cave-in near the Moldavanka sector of Odessa's catacombs, a local spelunking team stumbled upon a sealed steel container embedded in the limestone wall. The capsule, roughly the size of an industrial refrigerator, bore a faded Cyrillic engraving, Министерство государственной безопасности, SSSR, 1953. Its discovery was initially treated as a Cold War curiosity until Ukrainian archaeologists from the Institute of National Memory took possession. Inside were several leather-bound ledgers, brittle photographic negatives, and microfilm reels housed in lead-lined cases. A red stencil on one folder read, Della number 4791, Gruppe 9. Analysts would later identify this as a reference to a forgotten KGB Directorate branch, Asset Recovery Group 9. The Odessa cache, as it became known, quickly drew international attention, but access was restricted after intelligence markings were discovered matching early nuclear development documentation. Over the following months, fragments of the archive were painstakingly restored. The ledgers contained lists of German scientists, engineers, and intelligence officers presumed to have fled west during the collapse of the Third Reich. Several entries were annotated with the word repatriated, accompanied by coordinates across Eastern Europe. Historians initially assumed these were references to known Soviet recruitment operations. However, two documents stood out: typed memoranda titled Operacja Pastyr, Operation Shepherd, and Objekt M17. The E first outlined the formation of mobile KGB teams tasked with retrieval and neutralization of compromised scientific assets acquired by Western programs. The second, heavily redacted, described a research complex near the Ural Mountains used to process those retrieved individuals. Both carried the authorization signature of Ivan Serov, then head of the MGB, the precursor to the KGB. By late 2020, Ukrainian and NATO analysts cross-referenced names in the ledgers with declassified Operation Paperclip records. At least 9 scientists listed as transferred to the United States in 1946 were also marked as secured in the Odessa cache. One in particular, Dr. Werner Dittmar, a propulsion specialist from Peenemünde, was documented as captured 1951, relocation to Objekt M17. Western archives listed him as deceased in a car accident that same year. If authentic, the document suggested that Soviet counterintelligence units had successfully intercepted multiple German scientists, long thought to have defected west. The revelation threatened to rewrite Cold War intelligence history. In December 2020, a second chamber was discovered adjacent to the cache. It contained several metal canisters sealed under vacuum, labeled with both Russian and German serial codes. Radiological testing indicated traces of thorium and deuterium compounds, materials associated with early propulsion and reactor research. Attached to one canister was a handwritten label reading Prototyp Beta, dostavleno iz GDR, 1952. When metallurgical analysis began, Ukrainian officials abruptly halted the examination, citing security concerns. The entire cache was transferred to a military facility outside Kiev under the supervision of the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU. Rumors spread that a Russian intelligence operative had been intercepted attempting to recover part of the archive. In February 2021, an encrypted dataset believed to be sourced from the Odessa cache surfaced briefly on the dark web. Labeled M17 Ledger, it contained a mixture of Russian and German text, including transcripts of interrogations and technical diagrams. One transcript described a scientist detailing reactionless propulsion experiments based on captured Peenemünde schematics. Another referenced a radiation-driven chamber tested near Sverdlovsk in 1954. The authenticity of the leak was never verified, but metadata analysis confirmed that the files originated from Soviet archival formats unique to the 1950s. Within hours, the dataset disappeared and all associated links were scrubbed. Shortly afterward, Ukrainian investigators reported unauthorized access attempts to their internal servers traced to IP. Ranges in Kaluga and Omsk declassified. CIA reports later revealed that Western intelligence had known of Asset Recovery Group 9 as early as 1956, but underestimated its scope. A memorandum dated March 3, 1957, from the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, DST-SCI 731, described systematic Soviet exfiltration of Western-aligned German personnel. The report concluded with a stark assessment. Several paperclip scientists presumed active in US programs may have been replaced with Soviet doubles. No evidence of such replacements has ever been confirmed, but the Odessa cache's documentation reignited suspicions that Cold War technology races were built, in part on misdirection and silent abductions. By 2022, political tension surrounding the cache reached a boiling point. Russia officially demanded repatriation of stolen state property, while Ukraine argued that the artifacts predated the Soviet Union's dissolution and therefore belonged to Kiev's jurisdiction. NATO intelligence quietly funded further translation and forensic restoration, revealing new code references, Operation Tundra, and M17 termination. 1958. One recovered photograph depicted a concrete compound partially buried in snow, its signage reading only Objekt M17. Satellite overlays placed the image near Lake Karachay, one of the most contaminated locations on Earth due to mid-century plutonium waste dumping. The area had been closed to civilians for decades. In September 2023, a joint European research initiative proposed a limited expedition to verify the coordinates. The mission never launched. 2 months later, the lead researcher, Dr. Pavel Holub, died in what was reported as a vehicular accident near Brno. His notes disappeared from university archives the following day. The remaining Odessa cache materials were sealed in Ukraine's National Security Archive under the label Non-Public Historical Assets. International observers have since been denied access. As of 2025, the Odessa cache remains one of the most sensitive post-war discoveries in Europe. Leaked SBU summaries suggest that at least part of the recovered data was classified under nuclear non-proliferation treaties, indicating a potential link between the missing scientists and early thermonuclear research. The ultimate fate of Object M17 is still unknown. One final entry in the ledger, dated 1959 and signed only with the initials IS, reads, "All materials transferred to secure installation. Program concluded. Witnesses relocated." Below it, in faint pencil, another hand had written 3 words, barely legible but unmistakable in meaning. They never left. Chapter 5. The Frozen Signal of Station K9. In January 2024, the Norwegian oceanographic survey vessel Arctis Resolute detected a low-frequency radio emission while mapping the continental shelf north of Svalbard. The signal pulsed at precisely 477 MHz, an obsolete Soviet military frequency decommissioned in the late 1960s. At first, the anomaly was dismissed as atmospheric interference until technicians noticed that the signal repeated every 63 minutes with machine-like precision. Triangulation placed the origin beneath nearly 300 meters of pack ice. When a remotely operated vehicle descended through the fissure, it illuminated a rusted metal structure protruding from the seabed. A Cold War listening post. Its steel hull marked Stancja K9, Severny Flot. The find was relayed to Oslo and Moscow under the terms of the 2010 Arctic Cooperation Accord. Within days, Russian observers arrived to co-supervise what became one of the most sensitive joint operations in decades. By mid-February, recovery crews had managed to access the central communications module. Inside, they found equipment frozen in time, reel-to-reel recorders, teletype machines, and a generator still connected to a corroded battery array. A single unit remained partially active, its light flickering weakly. It was wired to a small transmitter labeled GOLOS 3. When reconnected to external power, the system emitted the same 4.77 MHz pulse that the Arctis Resolute had detected weeks earlier. Data retrieved from the device revealed a repeating Morse pattern translating to AKT-12 confirm, followed by an indecipherable string of numerals. Analysts determined that the message originated from inside the facility itself, looping continuously since approximately March 1961. The engineering team estimated the transmitter's power supply had been partially sustained by slow saltwater battery corrosion, a bizarre natural process keeping it alive for over 6 decades. Historians began tracing Soviet naval records. Station K9 appeared briefly in an unindexed Northern Fleet dispatch dated February 12, 1961. Operation Polar Echo, installation of early warning relay near 82 de Grain. The record abruptly ceased 2 weeks later with the entry, loss of contact. With polar relay, presumed ice collapse. No follow-up or recovery attempt was documented. Subsequent Soviet defense reports from the same period mention a signal misalignment that triggered a 2-hour alert in Murmansk's radar network, though no Western aircraft were detected. NATO intercept logs from 1961 similarly record an Arctic transmission anomaly matching the same frequency. Both sides had heard it, and both erased it from their official histories. When joint teams began cataloguing the station's interior, they discovered the preserved remains of 6 crew members sealed in a secondary compartment. Personal effects were intact: journals, ration tins, even chess pieces glued to a table against vibration. The final entry in a diary belonging to senior technician Oleg Karpov read, "The voice is still transmitting. We cannot shut it down." The phrase "the voice" recurred in multiple logbooks. What it referred to remains unclear. Nearby, engineers uncovered a rack of magnetic tapes labeled sequentially Voice 1, Voice 2, and Voice 3. The first 2 were blank, but the final reel contained several hours of faint recordings. When played, analysts identified background static interlaced with fragmented speech in both Russian and English. Phrases like confirm array, standby grid, and channel breach. Experts concluded the reel captured synchronized transmissions between 2 operators separated by thousands of kilometers. The technology required to maintain such stable dual frequency synchronization was not publicly available until the 1970s. The Tapes were sent to the Norwegian Defence Research Establishment FFI for analysis. Their internal report, classified NATO restricted, March 2024, suggested that the Voice 3 recordings may have originated from concurrent stations operating in the Barents and Chukchi Seas, possibly part of a coordinated Soviet-American experiment to prevent false radar detections during nuclear alert phases. If true, Station K9 would represent a secret collaboration echoing the spirit of Operation Silver Cross, though in an even harsher theatre. Russian officials rejected the conclusion, claiming the tapes were fabrications or misinterpretations of radio training exercises. Yet a declassified Soviet engineering note from 1960 mentions a prototype cross-modulation array designed to mirror foreign signals for calibration. Its project leader, identified only as Engineer VF, disappeared in 1962. No family records survive. By May 2024, the recovered data was transferred to a NATO secure facility in Brussels. Forensic analysts discovered irregularities in the timing signatures of the Morse loop. Every 21st cycle, the transmission's pause sequence altered slightly, encoding a pattern that, when plotted, formed geographic coordinates pointing toward an area near Franz Josef Land. Subsequent Arctic reconnaissance revealed nothing on the surface, but sub-ice sonar detected metallic debris fields beneath the glacier. The Russian Ministry of Defense declined further cooperation and withdrew its observers. Public statements described the mission as scientific exploration of no military consequence. However, the NATO investigation summary, leaked months later, referenced unknown infrastructure consistent with early submarine communications arrays. In October 2024, the signal from Station K9 abruptly stopped. The cessation coincided with a sudden shift in magnetic activity recorded across the high Arctic. When Arctis Resolute returned to the site, the bunker had collapsed under ice pressure. Nothing remained visible but fractured metal and disturbed sediment. Nonetheless, the transmitter's last data burst, captured by the monitoring buoy, contained one final Morse sequence. Decoded, it read, "Object located, awaiting confirmation." Analysts have debated its meaning ever since. Some argue it was a corrupted internal checksum. Others believe it was the final automated response to a remote ping that never arrived. Today, the physical remnants of Station K9 lie sealed under meters of frozen sea. Portions of the recovered data remain classified under joint custody between NATO and the Russian Federation. The Voice 3 tape has never been publicly released. Though a fragment leaked online in December 2024 contains faint overlapping voices repeating one phrase in both languages. Transmission maintained. Official investigations insist there is no further signal activity in the Arctic. Yet Norwegian research buoys continue to register intermittent 4.77 MHz, echoes roughly once every 63 minutes, always weaker, always fading, but never entirely gone. The frozen voice of Station K9 endures, whispering across a sea that remembers more than history is willing to admit.